My wayward life is my way. It's lovely to find others beside me, but no one can walk for anyone else. If we're going the same way, I welcome your company, but it would be unwise for you to track me, as it would be unwise for me to track you. When I asked TJ what this congregation wanted to reflect on today, he told me that the theme was reverence. I have to admit, I recoiled just a bit. I know that reverence can be a beautiful thing, but it can be punctured by laughter as easily as a pin punctures a bubble. Reverence makes me think of submission. It connotes a kind of respect that's so profound that from another angle it can look craven. Respect also makes me think of silence. Silence can express serenity and awe, but also abjection. You don't talk back to someone you revere. If you revere God, do you talk back to God? Must we wait for God to say the first word? But then this was TJ asking me to do this, and he isn't anything like the side of reverence that makes me uneasy. He's certainly not over-serious or submissive or silent. And I don't think actually anybody comes to Unitarian Universalism to be quiet, submissive, and to stop laughing. On the other hand, his title is Reverend. So there's that. I think he carries it very well. I could not. For me, reverence still makes me think of the priests from whose hands I took communion as a child, who I venerated and then learned not to. Of course, it was far weirder with them because they were not just called Reverend, but also Father, right? I also was suspicious that God and the priest had the same name. You know, something was wrong with that. So there was too much reverence, too much silence, too much submission in the church of my youth. And having been snookered by reverence, I ran in the opposite direction. And yet today, I end up here with you in this joyful reverence space. When I told my partner the title of this sermon, The Spirit of Irreverence, she said, but you're not irreverent. I said, no, I am irreverent. She said, well, no, you're not. And I said, but I want to be irreverent. And she said, well, sorry, too bad. You're just not. So I guess I have a strange relationship with reverence and irreverence. I'm an atheist theologian, a wisecracker, and by any measure of orthodoxy, a heretic. But I'm not irreligious. I'm just, to borrow Annie Dillard's phrase, spiritually promiscuous. Also, I like being around reverent people. I like the stories and the rituals and the music. I like the saints and the holy days. So I don't feel confused, just ambivalent, I guess. I'm going to blame it on my brother. Today happens to be the 46th anniversary of his death in a car accident. He was only 24 at the time, so at this point, he's been dead nearly twice as long as he was alive, which if he were here, would make him say, get over it, Captain. And I really have. I have gotten over it in the sense that his comings and goings are so completely interwoven with my own. But every year on this day, I do say his name out loud, because not to say it would feel, well, irreverent. I learned both reverence and irreverence from Jimmy. You could say he was a mystic, or you could just say he was touched. He was earthy, warm, and vulgar. Irreverent in the sense that his acquaintance with God seemed to induce no fear or shame. He died before I could understand what happened inside to make him like that. 3 months later, I became a teacher and student of religion, and I've been at it ever since. So perhaps my wayward career, the road that brings me here, belongs to his afterlife. Not long before Jimmy died, he mentioned what he wanted on his tombstone. Death. Excuse me. See, so that happened. That was God, clearly. What he wanted on his tombstone was from the letter to the Romans. Death, where is your victory? Oh, death, where is your sting? And he said stuff at the time like, I'm so happy, I could die now. Probably he said those things because he was deeply in love and soon to marry. But after his death, people made much of these seemingly prescient comments. There was a purpose and a plan to this, they believed. Maybe Jimmy knew this, they said. Maybe he was ready. I got over my brother's death by accepting that this was not true. It's not that I didn't want to believe the meanings that people attached to it. I tried for over a decade. But at the time, all that time, there seemed to be kind of a barrier around me, and on the other side, a tremendous pressure. And when the barrier broke, what rushed in was a sense of truth, a sense of clarity and steadiness. I knew that my brother had not just passed beyond a veil, he was gone. I knew that I had known this all along, and that the struggle I'd experienced was the struggle not to know what I knew. My brother remained present only in the sense that it's a real one, that every fallen bird is still there, beneath our feet. But the person I loved, this very particular face and voice and laughed, was dissolved. My favorite writer, Marilyn Robinson, once described humans as perishable. Perishable. Makes me think of lettuce. Jimmy was perishable, and so he perished. I am perishable, and so shall I. When I was a kid, I used to dream of flying, the way all kids do, but I could never get up altitude in my dreams. I try to run really fast and I jump into the air, but my butt would skip along the ground. I just couldn't kind of get up there. So, but after my brother died, about a year or so, I had my first successful flying dreams. In real life, I also jumped off a plane in that period, but that's another story. In the dream, though, my brother and I were big white birds. He taught me to fly over the roof of our childhood home, and the two of us then taught our younger brother to fly. And then all of a sudden, we morphed into fish, swimming around on the ocean floor, breathing water in and out, surrounded by a brilliant multitude. In place of the communion of saints, a communion of fish. The best thing about this dream is that the learning stuck. Ever since then, I've been able to fly in my dreams. If I'm inside, I fly, and I also dance on the ceiling. I have musical accompaniment in my dreams, sort of think of Fantasia. Or in my dreams now, if I'm standing on some height, like a high hill or at the top of an office building, I sort of get this temptation. And then I say to myself, no, don't do it. You'll just be showing off. But I can't help it. I just jump. I jump off the mountain or out the window, and then I climb on top of the wind, which carries me wherever it wants to go. I'll admit that navigation is a problem, and I cannot go in reverse. Still, to be carried by the wind is worth the uncertainty. Plus, I can teach other people to fly, at least in my dreams. 40 years after my brother's death and 6 years ago, a diagnosis of lung cancer brought these truths home to me again. It was an odd, ultimately serendipitous series of events. I was bodyboarding when a rough wave dislocated and then broke my shoulder. A few weeks later, I had surgery on that shoulder, which left me with a gut infection, which brought me back into the hospital, where a routine chest x-ray disclosed a small malignancy. In the midst of all this, I heard a conversation in the hallway outside my hospital room. The oncologist, whom I'd not met, was being apprised of the situation by a nurse. She was saying very softly that I'd been hospitalized for a digestive problem, but now they thought I had lung cancer. I heard him say, "Well, she'll shit now." In my hospital bed, I just sort of closed my eyes and breathed, dread in, resignation out, and I will leave you to imagine how the digestive problem worked out. That same oncologist a couple months later met with me to share the results of tests on the tumor they'd removed. The good news, he said, was that I didn't need chemotherapy, or to put it differently, chemotherapy would do me no good. The other news was that there was a 29% chance that the cancer would return and take my life within 5 years. Or, to put it differently, there was a 71% chance that I'd be fine. It's 71% that has prevailed. But at the time, the 29% seemed larger. I kept picturing myself in a lineup of 3 or 4 people, one of us about to be shot at random. Did I want it to be one of the others? How could I? Did I want it to be me? How could I? I realize this is an irrational way to think about my fate, but it was absolutely how I felt. And in a larger way, I think it was right. It was indeed connected to my perishable body, to other perishable bodies, to time, disease, and change. I was connected, but I didn't want to be. However much, though, I struggled to get loose, I was nailed to the spot. So there was nothing to do but learn. I had special opportunities to learn and wonderful companions in learning because at the time, I was part of a group of theologians who met for a weekend every year and periodically wrote textbooks together. At the time, I was contributing to a chapter on epistemology, so the warm-up assignment was that each of us should write a piece on what we knew and how we knew it. And I started writing that piece before I broke my shoulder, and then I resumed it a few weeks later, dictating into my computer because now my arm was in a sling. Soon thereafter, I had to stop for another several weeks to undergo surgery and recuperation. Coming back to that assignment, beaten up and broken open, I really couldn't pretend to believe what I didn't. The nearness of mortality made me desperate, not for faith, but for truth. And the truth that was forcing itself on me is that I won't survive my death. Death will be the end of me, and the end of me will not be the end of the world. I know that this is true, and I know that this truth is good. I've said the words "I know" several times just now, but of course I don't know what lies ahead. No one does. There's an element of choice in how each of us makes sense of our one and only lives, and no choice is more intimate or consequential than this one. That's why I don't want you to take me too seriously. I actually don't know that what I've expressed here is true. I just know that it feels like truth to me. And it turns out that I need truth more than faith. I guess this puts me on the outs with the Apostle Paul, who named faith, hope, and love as the cardinal virtues. But although I don't believe in God, I know there is grace. Although I don't have faith or even want it, I do have hope. And because I understand that hope is not just a feeling, but a virtue, I know that it has to be cultivated, fed and watered daily. And I do agree with Paul on his main point about virtue. The greatest of these is love. At the end of my brother's wake, there was supposed to be a closing prayer, but the priest forgot to show up. So it fell to my father to do the honors. He knelt and blessed himself, and so did everyone else. But he was so rattled and disoriented that the wrong prayer came out. Grace. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, he began. There was a gasp in the room, holding our collective breath, as everyone struggled not to respond, and above all, not to laugh. My dad stopped, collected himself for a second, and then mustered a Hail Mary. My sister and I, sitting next to each other, held ourselves together, got through it, protective of our father, and of course understanding exactly what had happened. But as soon as we could, we rushed downstairs to a private space and we laughed and laughed and laughed. We had a right to laugh, having been pierced through and through with the same grief that had so disoriented our father. We knew that our laughter, just as much as our tears, burst the boundary between the tragic and the ridiculous. We knew that we were in the deep because we could feel there in the deep all the waters running together. I know that everyone here has felt grief in our own lives and heartache for the world. I know that everyone here has the spirit of reverence. Therefore, I pronounce, with no authority whatsoever, that everyone here has a right to laugh. Everyone here is free to be irreverent. May we swim in that spirit, float on it, wallow in it as necessary, today and forever.